on a winding road in rural Pine Creek, where autumn painted the forest in amber, and gold Haley Moore and her unusual companion were making their routine drive home for 3 years. This skilled wildlife rehabilitator had shared her life with Clover, a rescued bobcat deemed too imprinted on humans to return to the wild. Their bond was special, but no one could have predicted its true depth until that fateful day when Haley suddenly slumped over the wheel, her body seized by an epileptic episode. She thought she had under control. The truck veered dangerously toward the tree. Recognizing the distress, Clover instinctively leaped onto Haley, pawing desperately until the car slowed down enough for her to nudge the gear shift into neutral, helping bring the vehicle gradually to a stop along the roadside. What unfolds next defies expectation. Sometimes the most extraordinary heroes come with spotted fur and golden eyes. This is the story of Clover, an extraordinary bobcat who saved her owner's life. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the winding rural roads of Pine Creek. Haley Moore guided her weathered blue Ford Ranger along the familiar route home. The windows cracked just enough to let in the crisp autumn air. In the passenger seat sat Clover, Haley's unusual companion, a 3-year-old bobcat with tawny spotted fur and alert tufted ears. Most people in Pine Creek knew Haley's story as a wildlife rehabilitator with 20 years of experience. She had nursed countless injured animals back to health, but Clover was different. Found as a tiny days-old kitten beside her dead mother, victim of a hit-and-run on Highway 89, Clover had been too young, too imprinted on humans to be released back into the wild with special permits and extensive training. Haley had become Clover's permanent caretaker, an arrangement that had evolved into a profound bond neither could have anticipated. Almost home, girl, Haley murmured, reaching over to scratch behind Clover's ears. The bobcat chirped softly in response, her golden eyes fixed on the passing landscape. At 38, Haley lived alone in a modest cabin on 5 acres of woodland at the edge of national forest land. Her parents had passed years earlier, and her brother lived 3 states away with his own family. Her life was quiet but fulfilling. Days spent working at the Pine Creek Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. She had founded evenings with Clover and her small menagerie of permanent resident animals too injured or habituated for release. What few people knew was that Haley had been diagnosed with epilepsy. In her early 30s, her seizures were mostly controlled with medication, but occasional breakthrough episodes still occurred. She was diligent about taking her pills, keeping regular sleep schedules, and avoiding her known triggers. It had been nearly 11 months since her last seizure, long enough that she'd begun to hope her condition was stabilizing. The first warning came as she rounded a bend in the road about 4 miles from home. A strange tingling sensation spread across her right temple, followed by an odd metallic taste in her mouth. Haley felt her heart rate quicken. No, she whispered, instinctively checking her surroundings. The road ahead was empty, with dense pine forest on both sides, no shoulder to pull onto, no houses nearby. She pressed harder on the accelerator, hoping to reach the turnout she knew was less than a mile ahead. She never made it. The aura intensified, rapidly flashing lights in her peripheral vision, the strange floating sensation she'd come to recognize as the precursor to a full seizure. Her hands began to tremble on the steering wheel. "Clover," she managed to say, her voice slurred. "Clover." Then the world disappeared. Clover had been watching the trees for movement, a habit from her wild ancestors. When she sensed the change in her human, the bobcat's heightened senses detected the subtle shift in Haley's, sensed the altered rhythm of her breathing, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. Clover had witnessed these episodes before, though rarely and never. In the truck, when Haley's body went rigid and began to convulse, the truck swerved sharply. Clover's powerful muscles tensed, her claws instinctively extending as the vehicle veered toward the trees. The Bobcat's mind, part wild instinct, part the intelligence developed through her unique upbringing, seemed to understand the danger with startling clarity. In a flash of movement, Clover leapt from the passenger seat onto Haley's lap. The woman's right foot was pressed hard against the accelerator, her hands no longer controlling the wheel. The truck continued to accelerate, bouncing roughly along the uneven roadside. Clover acted with what would later be described as remarkable presence of mind. With precise movements, she nudged her compact body against Haley's tensed right leg, using her weight to push the rigid limb away from the pedal. As the pressure eased, the truck began to slow. Next, the Bobcat stretched upward, placing her front paws on the steering column and using her strong back legs to press against the brake pedal. The truck slowed further but continued to drift. In a final crucial maneuver, Clover batted at the gear shift with her paw until it clicked into neutral position. The vehicle gradually rolled to a stop, coming to rest against a small embankment of soft earth. Haley remained in the throes of her seizure, her breathing labored. Clover chirped, anxiously pawing at her owner's arm, licking her face. Behavior she had learned helped monitor Haley during these episodes, but this time they were alone on a seldom-traveled road with no help nearby. The Bobcat's ears swiveled, catching the distant sound of an approaching engine. With one last nuzzle against Haley's cheek, Clover turned, pushed her weight against the driver's side door that had swung partially open during the swerving stop, and leapt to the ground. Darlene Whitaker had lived in Pine Creek her entire 67 years. A retired elementary school teacher, she now spent her days tending to her garden, volunteering at the community library, and visiting her 4 grandchildren who lived in the next town over. She was returning from such a visit, driving her sensible Subaru down Road 22 when she spotted something unusual on the road ahead. At first she thought it might be a large house cat or maybe a fox, but as she drew closer she realized she was looking at a bobcat standing in the middle of the road, its tawny body tense and alert, staring directly at her approaching car. "Good heavens," Darlene muttered, slowing to a crawl. Wild animals normally fled from vehicles. This one seemed to be deliberately placing itself in her path. She brought her car to a complete stop, about 20 feet from the bobcat. To her astonishment, instead of running off into the woods, the animal turned and trotted several paces up the road, then stopped and looked back at her. It repeated this behavior, moving forward, then looking back, almost as if it wants me to follow, Darlene whispered to herself, hardly believing the thought even as she had it. Cautiously she inched her car forward. The bobcat continued up the road, leading her around a bend where Darlene spotted a blue pickup truck pulled halfway off the road, its driver's side door open. The bobcat darted to the truck and jumped inside. Recognition dawned on Darlene's face. "That's Haley Moore's truck and her bobcat." She pulled over and hurried to the vehicle, her heart pounding with concern. Inside she found Haley slumped over the steering wheel, the bobcat nuzzling her face and making distressed sounds, though the seizure had passed. Haley was in the disoriented post-dictal state that follows, confused, exhausted, and not fully conscious. "Haley, Haley dear, can you hear me?" Darlene reached for the younger woman's pulse, finding it rapid but strong. "It's Darlene Whitaker. I'm going to help you." She pulled her cell phone from her pocket, relieved to see she had service in this stretch of road. As she dialed 911. Clover watched her intently, golden eyes unblinking. Sheriff Tom Polson had known Haley since she was a girl running around with scraped knees and pockets full of interesting rocks and feathers. He'd supported her when she'd established the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center and had even helped her navigate the complex permitting process for keeping Clover. When the call came in about an accident involving Haley, he responded personally, beating the ambulance to the scene by several minutes. She's coming around more now, Darlene explained as Tom approached the truck. I think she had some kind of seizure. Tom nodded, kneeling beside the open driver's door. Haley, it's Tom, you're okay. Now Haley's eyes fluttered open. Confusion etched across her face. Tom, what? How did your friend here brought help? Tom said, nodding toward Clover, who remained vigilantly at Haley's side. Darlene says that cat of yours was standing in the middle of the road, flagging her down. Haley's hand found Clover's fur, fingers weakly stroking the familiar coat. Good girl, she whispered. Smart girl. The ambulance arrived moments later. The paramedics were initially startled by Clover's presence, but the Bobcat remained calm, only growling softly when they attempted to separate her from Haley. The cat stays with her, Tom informed them firmly. This isn't the first emergency we've had with these two. As they loaded Haley onto a stretcher, Tom noticed something on the dashboard, a small surveillance camera Haley had installed months earlier after a break-in at the rehabilitation center had made her more security conscious. If it had been recording, it might have captured exactly what happened. Dr. Rachel Winters had been Haley's neurologist for 6 years. Ever since Haley's epilepsy diagnosis, they had developed not just a doctor-patient relationship, but a friendship, bonding over shared love of wildlife and the outdoors. When Haley was brought into Pine Creek Memorial Hospital, Dr. Winters was already waiting. Your levels are low, she said, after reviewing the initial blood work. Have you been taking your medication regularly? Haley, now fully conscious, though exhausted, nodded. Every day, same time, but I've been pulling long hours at the center. We had 3 orphaned bear cubs come in last week, and I've been up through the night with them. Dr. Winter sighed. Sleep deprivation is a major trigger. Haley, you know this. I know. Haley's eyes filled with tears. I could have killed someone if Clover hadn't been there. Where is your furry guardian angel? Tom took her home to feed her and check on the other animals. He said he'd bring her back tomorrow. Haley hesitated. He also said he got the footage from my dash cam that Clover actually that she helped stop the truck. Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow. Well, I'd certainly like to see that, but I'm not surprised. Animals are remarkably perceptive, especially ones as intelligent as Bobcats, and Clover has a special bond with you. I've always taken care of her, Haley murmured. Now she's taken care of me. The next afternoon, Haley was released from the hospital with adjusted medication and strict instructions to maintain regular sleep patterns. Tom picked her up with Clover safely secured in a large carrier in the back seat of his SUV. The Bobcat chirped excitedly when she saw Haley pawing at the carrier door. She's been agitated all morning, Tom said as they drove toward Haley's cabin. Wouldn't eat until I showed her you were okay on a video call. I'm sorry you had to. Bobcat sit, Haley said, reaching back to slide her fingers through the carrier's bars. Clover immediately rubbed against them, purring loudly, a sound closer to a growl than a typical house cat's purr. No trouble though. I think your other critters were a bit jealous of the attention she was getting. Tom glanced at her. I reviewed that dash cam footage. I've sent a copy to your phone, Haley. It's remarkable that Cat knew exactly what she was doing when they arrived at the cabin. Tom helped Haley inside and then brought in Clover's carrier, opening It once they were settled in the living room the Bobcat immediately bounded to, Haley climbing carefully onto her lap and pressing her head under Haley's chin. "I'll leave you two to rest," Tom said, placing a bag of groceries he'd picked up on the counter. "Call if you need anything. Dr. Jeff is stopping by later to check on all your animals." After Tom left, Haley spent a long time simply holding Clover, the reality of her close call sinking in. Finally, she reached for her phone and opened the video Tom had sent. The footage was better quality than she'd expected from the dash cam. It clearly showed the moment the seizure began, her eyes widening, hands gripping the wheel tightly before losing coordination, then Clover's swift action, jumping onto her lap, pushing her foot from the accelerator, somehow managing to hit the brake and shift gears, the truck slowing, coming to rest against the embankment. Clover checking on her, then deliberately exiting the vehicle and positioning herself in the road until Darlene's car appeared. Tears streamed down Haley's face as she watched. "You saved my life," she whispered to the Bobcat curled against her. "You beautiful, brilliant girl." Dr. Jeff Werber had been the veterinarian for Pine Creek and surrounding areas for over 20 years. He'd known Haley since she started volunteering at his clinic as a teenager, and he'd been a mentor and advocate for her wildlife rehabilitation work. When he arrived at her cabin that evening, he brought not just medical supplies but a hot meal from his wife Rose's restaurant. "Tom showed me the video," he said as he checked Clover over, "more as a precaution than necessity." The Bobcat tolerated his examination with unusual patience. "In 25 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything like it." "Do you think she really understood what was happening?" Haley asked from her position on the sofa. Dr. Jeff had insisted she remain seated while he tended to her animals. "Animals, especially predators like bobcats, have extraordinary situational awareness," Dr. Jeff explained, running his hands gently along Clover's spine. "They're constantly processing information about their environment. Clover has spent nearly her entire life with you. She knows your normal behaviors, sense sounds. She could detect the changes in your body chemistry when the seizure began." "But shifting gears, braking the truck," Dr. Jeff smiled. "Bobcats are incredibly intelligent and adaptable in the wild. They learn complex hunting strategies in captivity. That intelligence gets redirected. Clover has watched you drive countless times. She's observed the patterns. What happens when you move the gear shift, press the pedals in that emergency moment?" She applied what she'd observed. He finished his examination and gave Clover an approving scratch under her chin. "She's perfectly fine, not even stressed." He looked at Haley seriously. "You, on the other hand, need rest. Rosa's sending over meals for the next few days, and I've arranged for volunteers from the center to handle the daily care duties." Haley started to protest, but Dr. Jeff held up a hand. "Doctor's orders. Both Dr. Winters and myself take the time to recover. Clover will keep an eye on you," as if understanding. The Bobcat chirped and returned to Haley's side. Within days, the dashcam footage had made its way beyond Tom and Dr. Jeff. Darlene had told a few friends about the incredible rescue, and in the small community of Pine Creek, word spread quickly. Soon local news outlets picked up the story, and the video of Clover's heroic actions went viral online. Haley, still recovering at home, found herself inundated with messages of support and media requests for interviews. She declined most but agreed to a single interview with the Pine Creek Gazette, the small local newspaper that had supported her wildlife rehabilitation work from the beginning. "I've always known Clover was special," Haley told journalist Marion Hayes as they sat on her porch swing, Clover lounging nearby on a handmade platform. "But what she did that day goes beyond Special people keep using words like miraculous and extraordinary, and they're right. Some experts are skeptical. Marion noted, though her tone suggested she wasn't among them. They say a wild animal wouldn't have the cognitive ability to understand the mechanics of stopping a vehicle. Haley smiled, watching as Clover tracked a butterfly with her intense gaze. Clover isn't fully wild, but she's not domesticated either. She exists in this unique space between worlds. Maybe that's why she could do what she did. She understands both the natural world and the human one. The story ran the following Sunday, accompanied by a photo of Haley and Clover sitting together on the cabin porch. By Monday, national media had picked it up. By Wednesday, Haley's small wildlife rehabilitation center had received more donations than in the previous year. Combined 3 months later, on a crisp winter morning, Haley stood before a small gathering at the Pine Creek Community Center with her medication adjusted and a stricter adherence to proper rest. She had experienced no further seizures. Beside her sat Clover, unusually tolerant of the crowd, perhaps sensing the importance of the occasion. It's my honor to present this year's Pine Creek Humanitarian Award, Mayor Ella Lehner Thompson announced to a most unusual recipient. This award typically goes to a human citizen who has shown extraordinary care for others. This year, we make an exception for a very exceptional individual. Haley stepped forward, Clover secure on her special harness. Clover can't understand your words of praise or this beautiful plaque, she said, her voice steady despite her emotion, but she understands love and loyalty. Those are the qualities that saved my life that day on County Road 22. She glanced down at the Bobcat, who looked back at her with those intelligent golden eyes. Clover reminds us that the bonds between species can be profound and life-changing. The work we do at Pine Creek Wildlife Rehabilitation Center has always been about respecting and protecting the wild creatures we share this land with. Sometimes, as I learned, they protect us right back. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of another surprise, a significant grant from a national wildlife organization to expand the rehabilitation center. With these funds, Haley would be able to hire full-time staff, construct better facilities, and help even more animals as people mingled afterward, enjoying refreshments and taking careful, respectful glimpses of Clover. Darlene Whitaker approached Haley. "I've been meaning to tell you," the older woman said quietly. "That day on the road when I first saw Clover, I almost didn't stop. I was running late to pick up my prescription, and seeing a wild animal in the road, well, my first instinct was to drive around and continue on my way." She reached out a weathered hand, not quite touching Clover, but gesturing toward her. Something in her eyes made me stop. There was such purpose there. I've never seen anything like it before or since. Haley nodded, understanding completely. That's the thing about connections between species. We think we're so different, so separate, but when it matters most, those differences fall away. What remains is simpler and more profound. Later that evening, as snow began to fall outside the cabin windows, Haley sat on her favorite armchair with Clover curled at her feet. The Bobcat purred contentedly as Haley gently stroked her spotted fur. "You know," Haley said softly, "before all this happened, I sometimes wondered if keeping you was the right choice, if you wouldn't have been happier in a larger facility with more space, more stimulation." Clover blinked lazily up at her. "I don't wonder anymore," Haley continued. "I think we found each other for a reason. You may not live in the wild, but you're not a pet either. You're my friend, my family, my guardian." As if in agreement, Clover stretched and then resettled, pressing her warm body against Haley's legs outside the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world. In Quiet White Inside Woman and Bobcat remained together, an unlikely pair, bonded by mutual rescue, mutual care, and a deep understanding that transcended the boundaries between their worlds.